The Wheel of Time. On one occasion, I mentioned to Carlos that I had been on an excursion to the area of Balsam de Mapim in the north of Mexico, to a place known as the Silence Zone. He told me that he had already been there and added that the reason inexplicable phenomena happened in that place was because of powerful confluences of ego's emanations. He said, "The confluence of the emanations is what causes the well-known phenomena of distortion in compasses and other electronic devices. It is also responsible for the visual and auditory hallucinations in those who visit that area." Our conversation moved on to a topic that interested me greatly. Carlos called it the Wheel of Time. Time is the essence of ego's emanations, he told me. The emanations are perceived by sentient beings as time. Time is our subjective sensation of the emanations. Sorcerers see time as constant flow, as if it were a giant wave with everything caught up in its crest, making it all move in unison. That effect makes the passage of time seem real and unchangeable to us. If we could perceive everything at the same time, we would not see time as something that passes, but as the absolute, as an experience of eternity. The nature of our organs of perception is such that we select bundles of emanations in sequence, and that gives us the impression of the passing of time. Sorcerers have discovered that time is not something rigid. The manner in which we perceive it depends on the way we fix the position of the assemblage point. The human beings of our time are imprisoned in a collective position that makes us oscillate around the position of reason, where time is linear, a single recurrence moving ever forward in an unchanging direction. We all long, however, to break that linearity. That is why fiction stories are written about characters who travel through time. Deep down, we all know that the experience of time in which we are immersed is only a mirage shared by all of us who belong to this particular cluster of ego's emanations. Once they have learned to fix their assemblage point in diverse positions, sorcerers experience different types of time. Continuities that can flow slower or faster, or in several directions simultaneously. The sorcerers call this omnidirectional flow the supremacy of the Wheel of Time. Due to their experience in the labyrinth of time, the shamans of antiquity came to the conclusion that the real nature of time was cyclical, with no straight lines in the succession of events. That is why, in essence, all beings and events are cyclical, because everything recurs time and again. They saw that there were certain patterns or modes in energy. They also saw that cycles superimposed themselves on one another, interacting in indescribable ways and mingling to form new cycles. That is why all beings are connected like the beads of the rosary, and absolutely everything that exists forms part of the same weave of ego's emanations. That, for sorcerers, is the essential nature of the universe. Although I didn't fully understand what he had said, I marveled at his explanation, while the scope of his level of awareness astonished me. Just to say something, I remarked that scientists had made significant discoveries about the texture of time and space. He replied, "Theoretical physicists are advanced explorers who use mathematical logic to investigate the universe. But even they feel it to be an ineffective and inappropriate tool. The proof is that they can't agree even among themselves. And the unified theory is a fallacy explaining nothing. Real and tangible worlds exist where time passes in a way different from what is normal to us. I know, I have already been there. Here on Earth, sorcerers recognize anomalous points where emanations change their texture as places of power. In those places, energy behaves in ways different from the usual one. A sensitive person in the state of inner silence can extract a great deal of information about the mysteries of the universe from those sides. I asked him if he knew a place of power he could recommend. He replied evasively, "The world is full of such places, particularly here, because in this area, ego's emanations swirl like nowhere else I've seen. The difficulty lies not in finding such place, but in being able to recognize it and use it appropriately. In fact, any place can be a place of power for the person who manages to reach silence. We are generally so confused by the hurly-burly of the world around us that it is very difficult to apprehend the tenuous oscillation that can be felt when we are silent. The vibration we perceive is ego's emanations. It is time passing by. The ancients knew that the universe could be explained in part, but never in its totality, because the universe is not there to be explained. The only sensible thing to do with the ego's emanations is to use them. Shamans are very practical persons. They don't see the secrets of the wheel of time as theoretical knowledge, but as possibility of action. They have designed practices that actually make it possible for them to travel through time, although not through the linear time of our everyday experience, but through the real time of the emanations. What could be the practical use of that knowledge? I asked. The sorcerer who has learned to use the emanations knows it is possible to assimilate the moment, to make oneself one with it, and to extend eternally in any direction of his choice. Such is the freedom of perception, our real destination as luminous beings. Sorcerers struggle to break with the human form and to divest themselves of personality. Ultimately, they do it to make themselves one with the emanations of time and flow with them. The goal is to establish a personal relationship with time, a harmonic relationship that allows them to flow with the emanations in perfect equilibrium, so that the human will and the will of the ego are the same. Paraphrasing something that he himself had written, he said, "The knowledge of time is available only to those who investigate it deliberately." I wanted to know what that type of investigation consisted of. He replied, "To flow with time, you have to learn to face it as it advances towards you. Just like a bird which faces the oncoming wind in order to soar, never the receding one. By the same token, to face time, you must abandon the tendency to see yourself at the end of a line of events, as a participant in the chain of your personal and collective history. It is an illusion. The past and the future do not exist. The only thing that you really have is this moment. If you want to deal with the oncoming time, you have to dare to live the present. To flow with time is to live this moment intensely, accepting or rejecting the challenges that appear on our path, learning and experimenting with every new day of our life. To live in the present does not mean abandoning oneself to the randomness of the moment. On the contrary, it means having the speed to grasp everything the second it happens, without passing it through the filter of reason. That way, the world renews itself all the time, and the most exciting possibilities open themselves to us. One thus becomes aware of everything that happens around him. Living in the present does not imply disregarding past experiences. It means learning to see them as they really are, events outside the time in the flow of the cosmic intent. That allows one to extract accurate lessons from them and even give one the capacity to modify them as required. That is what recapitulation is for. Through recapitulation, you can literally intervene in the energy flow of the past. A sorcerer who has learned to manipulate the wheel of time can deliberately interfere in events as much as the power allows, and alter the future in his favor. By doing that, he puts himself in the best possible position for the completion of his task. The most dramatic effect the Wheel of Time has on a sorcerer's experience is the realization that he does not actually exist here or there, because time and space are not as absolute as we believe them to be. The parallel lines. I had just finished rereading the story of the jump into the abyss when I found out that Carlos was visiting the city. I immediately called the hotel where he usually stayed. They confirmed that he was indeed staying there, but was not in his room at that moment. Whenever Carlos arrived on a visit to the city, the news would usually spread among those interested. So, after a bit of investigation, I found out he would be giving a talk in an esoteric center run by one of his friends. I presented myself at the appointed time, sat down behind the others, and prepared to listen to the Nagual's teachings. It was Carlos' custom to disguise information by jokes and irrelevant prattle. Nevertheless, those who knew what he was talking about always recognized his hidden lessons. That evening, he spoke of what he called the greed of the middle classes. He said that our current system had transformed people into needlings, the need people. He openly ridiculed the meaningless life the middle classes had espoused, with the sole goal of achieving the coveted purchasing power so that they could buy a pile of useless objects they ended up storing in their garages until one day, weary of having no space, they threw everything out as rubbish. I remembered that he classed himself as a proletarian, obviously referring not to his lack of resources, but to the fact that he didn't possess or want anything. He said that being poor did not mean have no money. It was the need to possess things. Having finished his talk and going through the usual ritual of saying goodbye to his assistants, he signaled to me with his eyes, indicating that I should look for him later. I went to his hotel and found him alone in the restaurant. He invited me to sit down. He had ordered a soup with tortillas. I ordered the same. When we had finished eating, I asked him what had really happened to him during that famous jump into the abyss. Confessing I hadn't quite understood the metaphor. "It is not a metaphor," Carlos interrupted me firmly and explained. There are sorcery traditions in which sorcerers choose to perform a leap at the moment of departure on their final journey. With that intent, the participants jump together off the top of a high cliff. If they pass the test, they disappear from this world, Those who fail are found dead at the bottom of the cliff. The test that Don Juan put me through was really a preparation for what is yet to come. What jumped into the abyss that day were, first of all, my perception, and then the totality of me. I'd arrived at the inevitable conclusion that we were not solid, but were a feeling, a perception placed inside a description we called the body. And Don Juan gave me the opportunity to prove it. He went on to say that on reaching a certain level of awareness, one loses the certainty of being solid and surrounded by a world of objects. From that point onwards, one perceives the world in a way completely different from the usual one. He gave me as an example the reference he had made in his work to crossing the boundary between the two states of awareness, which he called the parallel lines, a sorcerer's achievement that could also be described as movement of the assemblage point from one specific position to another, instantaneously allowing the warrior to perceive a different world. According to Carlos, the process of transition between one world and another is perceived as a wall of fog, a perceptive gap caused by the movement of the assemblage point, while a different description is being aligned. Among themselves, the sorcerers refer to that place as the limbo, or the place of the yellow dunes. The bodily sensation one feels while aligning that other world is one of physically breaking a paper wall, which is giving light resistance and is perceived as a wall of fog. Breaking through that barrier is necessary in order to be able to align another world. The transition is perceived bodily as a crack at the base of the skull, like a twig breaking in two, accompanied by a bell-like sound in the ears. Sorcerers encourage their apprentices to repeat with the left side of the body any movement they do with the right side. The left-handed obviously need to perform this exercise in the reverse. The reason for this exercise is to help break a physical barrier that exists inside us. Once this barrier is shattered, it becomes much easier to move the assemblage point and to enter dreaming. Sorcerers use the metaphor of the limiting line to get the apprentice to commit to his new life of struggle as a warrior. To cross that line means to enter another world. That is equivalent to breaking the parallel line, which is neither more nor less than moving the assemblage point. And what about the parallel being? I asked. This being is the mirror image of oneself. It exists in the world at the same time as we and is our energetic counterweight. Since absolutely everything that exists comes in pairs, if our parallel being dies, we suddenly get ill without apparent reason and also die. The warriors who have the good fortune of finding their parallel being while in this world find in it a source of youth, happiness, and joy, because one completes the other. Very few warriors, however, have accomplished this feat. As I've described in The Second Ring of Power, the book that should never have been, Donna Soledad was one of the few. Why do you say that The Second Ring of Power should never have been? I asked. He took his time answering. As he smoothed his hair backwards, I could see an area of baldness at the front, which he concealed successfully by combing his hair forward. He appeared not to like discussing the subject very much, but nevertheless replied. At the time, I'd delivered a just completed work to my New York publisher. But Donna Florinda, having had found out what it was about, told me that people still weren't ready for that kind of revelation, and made me run back to the publisher at once to recover the manuscript, which was already being printed. It took a lot to convince the publisher not to publish that book. I had to promise to bring him a new one in 4 weeks' time. That was how The Second Ring came into being. Full of curiosity, I asked, "And what happened to the book that Donna Florinda stopped you from publishing?" I thought he wasn't going to answer, but to my surprise, he said, "It was about the world of dreaming and our relationship with the inorganic beings and the flyers. That is why one of the proposed titles was Seeing Through the Eyes of the Predator. The fact is, I was never happy about swapping the two books around, as, according to the agreement I had with Don Juan, I wasn't obligated to write about the other apprentices. What's more, I regret ever having published that work." I assured him that I loved The Second Ring of Power, and that, in my humble opinion, we were lucky to have such valuable material, which gave us better understanding of the life and the ways of sorcerers' apprentices. He shrugged his shoulders, as if to say, "Does it matter?"